Good afternoon and welcome to our Taylor Hall Coffee Hour session. I am delighted to welcome our coffee guest today, who is Mr. Keith Wellington. He is the president of the Intersecondary School Sports Association, and also he is headmaster, school principal, if you like, of St. Elizabeth Technical High School, more popularly known as STETS. Sir Wellington, thank you very much for joining us and agreeing to have this chat. Welcome to Taylor Hall's Coffee Hour. I'm not hearing you. I don't know if you're muted.
No, I wasn't hearing you, but I'm hearing you again. I think we had a short power outage a while ago.
Oh, sorry about that. All right, so let me just start by giving you a brief synopsis of what is our coffee hour. As you know, we are at the University of the West Indies, and Taylor Hall, along with all other halls, have a responsibility for the out of classroom learning of our students. And so while we know that the students that we get from people like yourselves and other schools academically are bright and sharp and so on, that there are some soft skills that we need to work on. We need to help them to become more rounded so that they are ready to take on the world by the time they graduate. And so this is just one of the many initiatives that we have to help students become more aware of what's going on a national, regional, and international basis. And we try to do it in an environment that is relaxed, that gives the students an opportunity to interact with our guests and to help them develop their critical thinking skills, so on and so forth. And so over the past few years, we have had a number of guests looking at different aspects of life generally. Now, this is the first one we are doing virtually. As everyone knows, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. And so you are our first guest online. So let's get into it. With me as well is Shaniel Mackenzie. She's the Deputy Hall Chairman at Taylor Hall. She's a final year student in Carrimack, and she will be monitoring questions from our guests on YouTube. So from time to time, I will go directly to Shaniel to have persons following us on YouTube ask their questions. So I want to start, Sir Wellington, before even we get into the meat of the matter. I did mention you are the president of ISSA, but who is the person, the educator Keith Wellington?
Who am I? Unfortunately, well, first of all, I'm not somebody who would drink from the cup you are drinking. I don't think you're properly right. So let me start there by suggesting that I'm not suggesting, I'm an avid Liverpool fan. So I don't think I'm in good company today. But I'm a career educator. I got into education reluctantly. When I graduated from high school and I went to Monroe. My mother wanted me to go to teachers college and I refused because I couldn't see myself as a teacher. Eventually she got me to do some pre-trained teaching and I found that I liked it. I liked the interaction I was having with the children at the time, who at that time were kids who were kids who I had been in school with because I went back to my old school to teach. So I was teaching amongst my as well as teaching students who I was in school with. I got a sense of being a part of a family before I fell in love with teaching. So I eventually went to teachers college, came to States to teach. I've been at States for quite a while. I would have moved up through the system at States from a classroom teacher. I was trained in mathematics. Online education, and part of my degree was focused on online platforms. 20 years, so it is university in curriculum and instruction. My involvement in sports would be based on my love from high school in particular. Coming up all my life, I'm a real sports fan. I played cricket and football, but I like all sports. I think probably to watch, my favorite sport is probably track and field and football, but I also like person. I have one son, been married for almost 20 years to the same wife. So, and she makes me who I am.
All right. I'm going to ask you just to repeat the bit about university. I think an online thing, I think the internet feed went a little bit. And
no, I was saying that my first degree is in computer science. I got a scholarship from the Commonwealth of Learning to do computer science, and a large focus of that degree was on programming and online learning, online platforms. So when we started, I did that degree about 20 years ago. We were doing JavaScript writing, which was fairly new at the time. So as I said, I think that that experience has come in very handy, especially now.
All right, thanks for that. Let's move into the meat of the matter, though. Today we're talking about the impact of the global pandemic on student athletes, and in the context of you being the ISSA president. I wonder if you could tell us what really is ISSA and how long has this organization been in existence?
All right, so Intersecondary School Sports Association is an association of high school principals. All secondary high schools are eligible to be their principals. The association responsibility of organizing competitive high school sports. So that's the only real responsibility of ISSA. There are other principals organization that does other things. But from our perspective, ISSA focuses on organizing high school competitions, inter-high school competitions. We would have been around for over 110 years. I think 1907 was when we started. Started with, I think, 4 principals, JC, Wolmer's, Calabar, and Monroe, I think, at the time, were the principals that started the organization. So I think most persons would recognize us for organizing football and champs, but we also have about 10 other different sports: basketball, netball, swimming, hockey, table tennis, amongst others.
Right. And what would you say as president of this institution? What role would you say that ISSA has played or is playing in the development of student athletes generally in Jamaica?
Well, first of all, we just start from a basic fact that most persons wouldn't recognize. Sporting competitions that are organized for schools up to, I think, 3 years ago was not funded by the government. So schools that participated in these competitions had to find resources from outside of the regular government budget to enable students to participate in these activities. So principals had to be very creative, and many of them would have their various stakeholders, including boys, PT, and so on. But what principals, and then maybe this is one of the reasons why we have become so strong, because it is principals who had to find the wherewithal to allow students to expose their talents through these various competitions. I think that we would have played a significant role over those 100 in the development of all these major sports that in Jamaica. So if you look at it, we precede the JFF. We existed before the JFF. We existed before the J3s. We would have, I think, existed before the JCA. So a lot of our organized competitions in Jamaica would have started with ISSA. And of course, we don't have a lot of professional academies where youngsters are able to start training and focusing on sports from, let us say, age 8 or 9, like they do in Europe and North America. And so high schools are really where talents are discovered and harnessed through our high school programs. And as I said before, ISSA is the body that is responsible for the organ activities with its member schools.
Right. COVID-19, we are all impacted significantly by what has now become a global pandemic and has been affecting us since round about March. Could you share with us how this has impacted normal operations of ISSA sports programs?
All right, so as most persons are aware, we meaning Jamaica, would have encountered COVID-19, our first case of COVID-19 in early March, which would have been, I think, 2.5 weeks before the staging of Champs. And I need to remind everyone that Champs is the biggest high school sporting competition in the world. It is one of the biggest track and field outside of Diamond Leagues, the World Championships, the Olympics. And we were well on the way to planning the staging of the 2020 version of Champs when we had to cancel the event because of the introduction of that first case to Jamaica. That had a significant impact on us in terms of finances. Champs is a multi-million-dollar event annually, tens and tens of millions of dollars. Income and can be affected there. We would have had to look at our arrangements with our sponsors, the commitments that we would have made to our various stakeholders, and all of those things we had to address the impact that it had on those events. So that was the first and most immediate impact that COVID-19 had on ISSA. With the introduction of COVID, not many of us knew all the details as to how to handle the case, and the country basically went into lockdown over the next 2 months or so. And so it affected us in that all our competitions, we had to eventually cancel them, and we have not been able to have any competition for our high school March 13th. And of course, well, school has not reopened since either, but there has been no competitive sport for high school kids for the last, 6-7 months? Well, maybe closer to 8 months.
Right. You mentioned Champs, and I wanted to ask you about that later on. But since you mentioned it, I'll jump to that question and ask you bluntly. Will Champs be held next year?
That's $1 million question. That's $1 million question. The most honest response that I can give is that in all likelihood, we will have Champs.
Oh. That's some positive and exciting news. And you also mentioned the financial fallout for ISSA having not been able to host your premier and most profitable event last year. How bad really is it for you as an organization? Because we know this is where you raise your funds from to fund much of the other programs that are not income generated.
Right. You're absolutely correct. So it has had a significant bearing on us. But first of all, let me start with the positives. I think that we have a very good relationship with our sponsors. Grace Kennedy is our title sponsor. And they, through their various companies, almost maybe about 80% in terms of sponsorship income comes from. We have also Puma, who is our gear sponsor. along with a couple other sponsors. But we have a very good relationship, a very tight-knit relationship. The product champs is an extremely valuable commodity, and therefore value the commodity. And because of that, the fallout that would normally come from something like that did not necessarily get as bad as it could. And we were able to work out an arrangement with our sponsors that allowed us to share some of the losses while also looking forward to ways to ensure that the fallout did not perpetuate itself too far beyond champs, meaning that having recognized that the income from champs would be income that is used to stage other competitions, we were able to put in where if time had allowed and we needed to have other competitions before our sponsors. So from a positive perspective, I think that we came out well on that side. But of course, in terms of building and being able to build on what we are able to get from champs, set back, I think, maybe a year or two. And so some of the things that we would have wanted to do with the other sporting competitions will be delayed by maybe a two-year span.
All right, so let me dwell on that situation and the positive spin or outlook that we're taking on champs. And I'm staying on it because I know that is one of the premier sporting competitions that we look forward to. School has been out for a number of months now, the better part of a year. What condition would be the various programs, track and field programs, be in now? I mean, I know under normal circumstances, most schools would be well into their program background work. Mm-hmm. What is the current situation? Are student athletes just at home, not having any background training, anything at all? And the second part to that question, if we're lucky enough and things improve so that we can have champs, what kind of performances can we expect, given the fact that students have been out of school and training for so long?
All right. So let me start with the expectations. We have taken the position that based on all that has transpired, for us now, objectives have to change. And so for champs, for all the other sporting competitions that we normally host, we are saying that the expectation now must first focus on participation. So not necessarily competitions per se, but participation, getting our student athletes out again, getting them outdoors, getting them training, getting them in a state of mind where they are able to express themselves, and not necessarily focus not yet on who is going to be the best at whatever you are doing. So if we were to have a cricket competition or a football competition, our major objective would be to get the kids involved once more, because being out for 9 months in any sport is a significant, there's a significant negative impact on being absent from the sport for that while. So in terms of expectations, we are not going to be looking to a champs where we want to see people breaking records and persons running time out of this world and all of that. So for us, that expectation that we're working towards is getting students to participate. What has been happening, I know that there are a number of our top schools meaning schools with more resources than the norm, schools who also spend a tidy sum in terms of budget for the sport. I know that some of these schools have started some form of training to host a number of their students by themselves, while there are other schools who would have focused on maybe the 3 or 4 or 5 athletes that are really special athletes within their programs, and have tried to get them to continue to train. While I think the bulk of the student athletes population now, and schools would have focused on helping them to mentally get through the period while trying to do some work on their own from home. So there's a variety of approaches to take based on the resources available to the different schools. But I think that for the most part, especially our top junior athletes, they would have, as you said, the background work that is normally done September, October, November, early December. I think those would have been done. And we are hoping that by next month, most of the student athletes will find a way to get back working to get in shape.
All right. And any indication, I know this might be a difficult one because there are other stakeholders who would be involved, but if we're having champs, is it likely that we would have spectators? Would it be limited? And I know it's early, but what would be the thinking at this point?
All right, so let me just say that we have an idea of what would be likely to happen, because we have been having a series of consultations, series of meetings. As you said, there are a number of stakeholders. Champs is actually a national event. It's a high school sporting event, but it's actually something that belongs to Jamaica. It's a heritage. Just earlier this year, the World Athletics, formerly IAF, recognized as one of the international heritage meets, meaning we were recognized for the contribution to national track and field. So it's not just an ISSA event or a high school event per se, it's a national event. And we've been meeting with the persons concerned. We've been looking at the options available to us, and we are coming up with a plan. But unfortunately, we can't make it breaking news from here at all. But we shortly will let the public know what is likely to happen.
All right. Moving on, we've been talking about champs, but as you mentioned, there are other sporting disciplines that the organization look after. And so what considerations will be taken into account then? Because we would just have a fraction of the regular school year left. What are some of the considerations that you would take into consideration when selecting the competitions that will happen?
Yeah, we would have taken the last 2 to make an assessment of what is happening within our schools, because at the end of the day, a part of what we want to do is to make sure that students are back in school, focusing on their priorities as in terms of academics, and making up for all those lost time. So we would have been looking at that, looking at the scenarios that will exist when they come back to school and how we'll be able to treat them based on our change of objectives as well as it relates to competition versus participation. We are looking at whether or not we resume face-to-face next term. We are looking at different types of activities that we can get our kids involved in, whether it's going to be physically or virtually through workshops or training, or enlightening them as to career paths involved in their different sports, getting them involved in learning the rules, training them to be match officials, whether it's going to be cricket or football or netball or basketball. We're looking at a set of activities that will get them engaged over the last two terms. If it becomes possible for them to go outdoors, we are also looking at, let me call them tournaments rather than competitions, that we can involve them for the different sports. Right now, we have identified cricket and table tennis as the 2 sports that we think that we want to start as soon as we're able to have activities outdoors for them.
Right. And let me just remind persons following on YouTube that you are able to ask questions of the ISSA president by typing in the chat, and Shanil will come to us with those questions as they come in. I want to shift gears a little bit now, and for us to talk about some of the impact, the psychological impact that the pandemic is having on many of the student athletes. They have not been able to compete in the way they are accustomed to. We ourselves in Hall here, based on conversations we've had with some of our student athletes, and I'll share with you one of the response. Now, we had a few responses. One athlete said, "It prevents me from doing what I love. and sports is just what I use to express myself and free my mind. It also hinders me from personally communicating with people who I can relate to mostly. And of course, it makes me lazy and inactive. What kind of feedback are you getting from your students, your coaches, not just within your own school, but the members, other schools across the length and breadth of Jamaica?
Similar to what you would have heard from that person. Let me start with the coaches. Coaches have these student athletes almost as if they are their children. They try to plan for them and focus on getting them to max talents and whatever opportunities those talents can bring. From the coach's perspective, they are very concerned that they would not have been able to help those students to maximize their abilities over the time. And of course, from their own personal perspective, they would have be concerned because many of them are employed on part-time basis, and therefore there would be a loss of income for them. For our student athletes, they have, I think most persons know that, especially in athletics and football, to a lesser extent, netball, basketball, after these kids, they are very tracked in terms of trying to focus on the sport that they play and, dreaming of all the big things that can happen for them. What COVID has done is to almost take away that opportunity for them to express themselves, to participate, to really get that fire that is within them, and the frustration that they have at not being able, not just sport, but the social interactions that come with participating in sport, interactions with their teammates, with their coaches, who many of them have really, really close relationships with, but the adoring fans, the schoolmates who look up to them because they are student athletes. So it has had significant effect on their psychology. It has, I think, for them, many of them, their value systems are built around their involvement in sport. It is who they identify themselves to be. Not being able to participate and show off those talents means that they are almost in many cases in a sense of identity crisis, in that they are not able to say that, to see the value that they would normally see when they are, in the heights of competition and people look up to them and adore them. So I think that those are the challenges that they face. And of course, many of them work towards getting scholarships to UA or the other tertiary institutions here or abroad. And they see this now as creating a negative getting that opportunity for scholarship.
Let me ask you, how are we helping to mitigate the negative effects of what's going on now with the students at the school level? Are coaches in touch with them, administrators, teachers? How are we helping to cushion this tragedy?
Yeah. I think in all of this, I think the coaches are really, really key because of the close relationship that they have with the student athletes. But the truth is sometimes the coaches don't have the resource. It is going to be the ability to interact with the students and to have discussions with them that can speak to their psychological needs. But also, when they're in school, many of them depend heavily on their involvement in these sporting activities to find the resources to cope day to day in terms of just simple basic financial resources. Because, for example, especially amongst the top schools, a kid who plays football will go into camp maybe as early as June, July of each year, and they will spend the next 4 to 6 months in camp where the school helps to a day, which doesn't necessarily apply when they are at home. So there is this, the schools, many of us as principals have recognized that, and even though we may not see competitions happening now, we have had to be looking out for their welfare others who may not be involved in sports. But we have had to be looked. Their psychological, their resources to be able to adequately do. Much of what is able to do come from activity talk shop sales for that you may have at the end of the year, your school fair or your school play and all of that. So we have been trying to help student athletes as much as we can. Some have been able to better do it than others, but for the most part, schools would have been trying through the different supports that they have at their disposal.
Great. I think we have a couple of questions from Shanil now. I'm going to ask you with our watchers on YouTube. Go ahead, Shanil.
Shanil is silent.
Good evening, Mr. Wellington. I'm trying to turn on my video, but I don't know what is happening.
Okay.
However, this is a great. I got the option. Great. Good evening again, sir. So I've gotten a question from the hall secretary, Sandy Miller, and she's asking, how badly would you that students? Let me repeat that. How badly would you say that students who were to participate in camps, if it wasn't cancelled due to the pandemic, were affected as it relates to those athletes who would attain scholarships?
All right, so I don't have the numbers, but I know that many, I would say most of them, were able to move on. With good times, and I think those who would have been most affected would be those who were the top athletes and who would have wanted remember as well that even from the college's perspective, we have had instances where college either cut it totally or reduce
I don't know if you're hearing me, Mr. Wellington. Sorry, you may have to repeat much of that. I think we lost you.
Right. So an example of a kid who got a
Are you hearing Chanel?
Mr. Wellington is breaking up, so I think that he would have to repeat majority of the answers to that question.
I think we lost him.
Oh yes, yes, yes.
Let's give it a few, and hopefully he's back in.
Let's give him some time to reconnect. In the meantime, the persons can send their questions in the chat, and I'm sure that it will be answered a little bit later.
All right, so I'm back.
Okay, great.
Right.
I don't know which where did I leave off? What was the last?
I think you should go again from the top with that answer. I think we missed of it.
Who would have expected to they were not significantly affected. The ones who were more affected were those who they would have been hoping to peak at champs and to draw the attention of their coach, Those were the ones who were most affected. However, we have to bear in mind that even the colleges themselves had issues. So there were a number of colleges who either had to cut their program, suspend their program for the year, and therefore did not take on additional students, or who had to cut their budget for scholarships, and so could not take on all those that they would have hoped to have taken on. And I was pointing out that I have an example of a student athlete who got a full scholarship, got all his documents, got through at the embassy, and was just a few days away from traveling abroad to take up his scholarship when he was told that we have cut the program. The college has said that there will be no scholarship. Fortunately for him, he was able to get into another university. And you would have seen recently where Clemson, which is one of the top universities in the track and field program. So there are a number of issues relating to COVID that will be affecting our student athletes. It's just about us trying our very best to make best use of whatever opportunities still exist.
Right. I know Shanil had another question. I think her signal has dropped for the minute. So I'll press on with another question until she gets back on. And one of the things I want to look at a little bit more is, and we've started to talk about it, the college and university programs and the impact it is having on student athletes there and the implications for students coming in. Because we all know that sports in general is developmental. An athlete tends to build and improve year on year. And with this disruption, I wonder what will be the impact on that production line of quality that we have seen consistently coming out of Jamaica, in particular in track and field. What are the coaches saying? And I know we have excellent coaches across Jamaica. How will this hiatus impact the development of students? Well, we see what's happening now, but in the medium and long term. And what does that mean for Jamaica's track and field program going forward? And any other sport for that matter?
Very, very, very good question, Atal. I think that is something that we have to be really concerned about. And whatever capabilities we have to address it, we have to be very serious about addressing it. I look around as a principal, and outside of sports, I am concerned that we are going to be losing quite a few of our young persons. None of us sitting here would have ever experienced a situation where, as a student, you are outside of your classroom space for 9 months, 10 months. So even as regular students, we are going to be losing some of our students who are not involved in any co-curricular activities, but who may already have gotten to the point of frustration where they have decided that they will take another route. They are not going to be involved in this formal education process right now. For sports, as you said, it's developmental, and it's something where you have to build on where you're coming from. Student athletes who would have been disengaged over the last 10 months or so, we are going to find that we are not going to be able to re-engage some of them. We know that some of those persons may be persons who may have gone on to be the Usain Bolts, the Chris Gales, the Ricardo Fullers of this country. But we are going to lose some of them. So what is it that we are going to do to address that? And this is where I'm thinking that from an ISSA perspective, we now have to ensure that this does not go on any longer. Even where we are not able to have competitive sports being played, to student athletes, somewhere like UWI, which is an academic institution but has sport as a valuable part of its program for developing youngsters. We have to look at how we can partner with you to expose our student athletes to the different opportunities that exist in sport outside of playing the game, because I think that is where we stand to lose the most, where student athletes figure that sport is about playing it. So how about those who want to be the masseuse or the physiotherapist or the sports management managers or the sport attorneys, right? How about those who may now figure that they have lost interest in sport? So there's really no career path that they are going to be able to pick up that is related to sports. We are going to, from ISSA's point of view, be focusing on that part of it to ensure that even if we lose some of our competitive sportsmen, we don't lose, the sport doesn't lose them. All right, so I think that those are the things that we have to start thinking about, because as you said, it's developmental, both in terms of the competitive student athlete as well as those who want to be involved elsewhere. And the coaches are very concerned, and that is why many of them have gone out of their way to try and keep these student athletes engaged. Some schools have been very supportive of the program. Well, the program belongs to the schools, but many of the schools cannot afford to sustain it. But they have tried their best to ensure that where it is possible, they offer whatever support they can to the students.
You mentioned the cost of these programs, and we know that there are some schools that have really strong alumni and they help a lot. Is there any financial support that ISSA lend to schools in general, and in particular those schools that are more challenged in terms of finding resources and funding to help to build their sporting programs? What role does ISSA play in that?
All right, so the structure of ISSA and our finances, what we try, remember we're a non-profit organization. So what we try to do in terms of funding is to help all our schools on a consistent basis. So each year for each competition, we provide some level of funding to allow these schools to participate. What we don't have, and which we may have to be looking at sometime soon, is a set of resources that you can target specific programs or specific schools to say, all right, so this year we're going to have 2 schools with a play field or with a particular program based on their application or what have you. But what we have been trying to do is to share whatever resources we have amongst our member schools all the time. So for example, to participate in football, rather than asking schools to provide their own gear and to pay for the umpires' fees, referees' fees, and all of those things, we usually spend a lot of money on those. I can tell you, for example, for football, schools, we spend maybe directly putting in the hands of schools, we spend upwards of $50 million each year on football. Just that goes directly to the school, whether through the purchase of gear or through travel subsidies or whatever we provide. But what we may have to look at now is to say, listen, we won't be able to spend all $50 million each year. We'll spend 40, and we're going to put aside $10 million so that every 2 years we can spend $5 million on 2 schools to help them to push start their programs or to help in an era where other schools can benefit as well.
Excellent. Shanil, are you back with the other question? I'm not seeing Shanil's mic, so it seems as if we have lost her for the minute. Following on that question, what role does the ministry play in funding, if any, or is it that schools and ISSA are on their own? They have this huge developmental responsibility, but they survive on the good graces of corporate Jamaica.
Exactly. Your latter statement, or the latter part of your statement, aptly sums it up. We get no support, no governmental support as an organization from any one of the government ministries. As a matter of fact, I can tell you that, for example, for Champs, what we pay to use the stadium is more than what everybody else pays. National associations get the opportunity to use the stadium for training and for all of that. If we want to use it, we've got to pay. But I think that's a dispensation that we probably would want to to look at how is it that we can change sometime soon. So, for example, if you think about where we are now and the effect that COVID has had on sports generally, and all the issues we have raised about our children and the effect that it has had on them, we are thinking that now is an opportune time for us to partner with our various government agencies to help to ensure that we get back our kids participating in these activities, providing them with the opportunities. So even when we think about the final 2 terms of this year and the various sporting competitions that have not been played, the football, the netball, basketball that should have been played during the first term, we not obviously won't be having sponsorship arrangements in place for those. We are going to be looking at how is it that we can partner with InSport, for example, to stage these mini tournaments that will allow these kids to participate in these netball, basketball, football competitions, and so on. So that partnership with the government agencies is something that we have to fix, and I'm sure that based on where we are now, it is in everybody's interest for that partnership to work.
Excellent. I see Shanil is back. Shanil.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Wellington. A very interesting question here. What advice would you give to athletes who paid little attention to academics?
All right, so it is the same advice that I normally give them, and I would also reinforce it almost with a sense of gloating, to say to them that, listen, we have been saying this over and over. So now here is the real life example of what can happen. That is the advice we have always said to them, that listen, there are many opportunities for you who are involved in sports. And if you're an excellent sportsman, football, cricket, track and field, you are going to get opportunities. But guess what? If there are 10 opportunities available to you now because you are the best 100-meter sprinter, if you add 6 or 7 CXCs to it and 2 CAPE subjects, those 10 opportunities will become 30. Right? So simply put, yes, you can do well as a sportsman with your talent, but it is relative, right? And so if you twin your academics with your sporting abilities, what you are doing is multiplying those opportunities over and over. And if you bear in mind, not only will you be able to do the sport and have the academics to back it up, but you are also, it's an insurance policy, because there are going to be occasions like these when you are not going to be able to participate in sports, whether it is going to be through a pandemic, through injury, through some misfortune. But the academics is an insurance policy that enhances your ability to grasp the opportunities that are available because of your sporting talent. So we would say to them now that if you were missing out on your academics, and it is never too late, that's a good thing about academics. And if you're a student athlete in high school, it means that you're relatively young. And so don't let all this time pass away without you trying your very best to catch up.
Most definitely, sir. And I'm sure that most people will, of course, agree with your answer on this one. And just a follow-up question, how can sports students maximize their opportunity during this pandemic of attaining an overseas scholarship?
All right, so I don't think much has changed outside of the numbers where schools are concerned that are cutting on their budgets. So the opportunities still exist, but there are now a little bit more, we have a little bit more of a challenge, because some schools, one, they are cutting budgets, and two, the issue of traveling and when is it that you get back to training and involvement in these physical activities are still uncertain. So if you're a grade 11 or a sixth form student now, you will be a little bit concerned as to whether things will get back to some semblance of normalcy before you graduate from high school. And that's another reason why you need to focus on your academics, so that you can get into college on your own merit in terms of academics. And maybe if things change over time, you can move on through scholarships. But the process is basically still the same. Do well in your sport, do well academically, you will catch the eyes of the scouts. And if you are not catching the eyes, you can create your own profiles, reach out to colleges, and but make sure you have your own portfolio available. So if you play cricket, well, cricket, the opportunities are not as many as for football and track and field and basketball, but have your profiles available so that you can sell yourself.
Thank you so much, sir. And another student is asking, how were athletes recruited for colleges overseas?
And this year, if it's right, so for track and field, and this is the thing about track and field, you don't just turn up and be a very good athlete on one particular day. Usually, as Atal said earlier, sports and in particular track and field is developmental. So you build on what you do day over day, day on day, and so you for athletes, although they may have missed champs, there's actually their work would have spoken for themselves over time. So an athlete who was 16 years old last year and ran 10.7, would be a class 1 athlete looking to run 10.5, didn't get to run. Still able to say that last year on my path, on my developmental path, I was at 10.7. The coach will look at it and say, okay, I think that based on where he was, this trajectory will take him to where I would have expected to recruit a class 1 athlete. And so I'm going to take a chance with him. So they would still be able to attract attention.
Thank you so much, sir. And I turn over to Mr. Hamilton for further questions.
All right, so just a couple more as we wrap. The hour has passed quickly. I want us to look to the future, Sir Wellington, post-COVID. How do we turn this engine again and get it moving from, a slow start to running at full tilt again? What are the steps that ISSA is looking at? Let us say our vaccine, we are lucky to be part of the vaccine program in short order. And by the end of summer next school year, we are looking at something close to normal in terms of face-to-face. What are the steps? Have you looked that far as an organization?
Definitely, and we have been looking. The first thing that we would want everyone to recognize is that we are still uncertain as to when things will get back to normality or anything close to normal. So rather than waste times teetering around, what we would want everyone, including ourselves, to do is to take the approach that we are going to be finding ways of functioning as close to normal in an abnormal situation. So you're talking about protocols to compete, protocols to train, staging events or activities that don't put persons at risk. So I mentioned earlier about getting our student athletes involved in other facets of sport outside of the competition arena. So getting them involved in understanding the game, knowing the rules, understanding the opportunities that are available to them, and just keeping them abreast of what is happening. So that is a way of keeping the machine tuned so that when you turn the engine, you're not turning the engine and dust is falling off. But also gradually getting into competition mode by having activities where they participate without actually finding a way to compete to be number one, but just participating, getting involved. So for example, if you talk about, let us say netball or basketball or those court game, looking at playing the game rather than playing with seven for netball or 5 for basketball. You're looking at just doing drills or doing for basketball, for example, you can have 3-point free throw competitions and all of those things, so that instead of whole game situations, you're actually developing skills and keeping your skill set sharp across the different sport. So we have to be innovative. We can't expect that in an abnormal situation we are going to be able to do the normal things like we normally do. But being innovative, being creative, being able to identify smaller ways of getting the big things done.
All right, I'll ask my final question and then I'll throw over to Shanil before we wrap. Are schools, as part of developing their student athlete, preparing them for life beyond high school and getting them to think about a professional career, in the sense that what are the things that they will need outside of being a very good runner or a very good footballer? Is there any program or in the training that they get, because the training can also be in the classroom, are they getting the steps that they will need an agent, maybe they will need a manager, they may need a publicist? Or is it that schools are leaving that to the college and universities to help them prepare at that level?
We still have that thinking, and maybe rightly so, that high school sports is about participation and socialization and not so much focused on professionalism. However, in the context of Jamaica and how sports is developed in Jamaica, I think that this is something that we have to take a lot more seriously in terms of the formal organizing or the formal activities around our high school competitions. And this is something that I think that as a body, ISSA will want to take on in the near future. There is an opportunity right now as we speak for us to start that facet of our responsibility as principals to get students, as you said, prepared for life outside of sports. Because I think everybody would now be willing to accept, just like how you have your chemistry student or your physics students or your building tech student being prepared for a career in those areas. The students who play sport can be prepared for careers in sport. I think that maybe 10 years ago, it would be a little bit more difficult to convince people. But where we are now, where sport is now as an industry, I think that more persons are willing to accept that these young men and young women who we have participating in this sport may be able to achieve financial stability from the sport and not necessarily being top of the thing. I was watching last night somebody who you would be very familiar with, Chadwick Walton. I saw Chadwick saying he has won now 5 international T20 tournaments, playing in places like Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Chadwick would not be recognized as a top West Indian cricketer, but I'm sure he has earned a tidy living from cricket. And I think a lot of that would have come from what he would have learned as a student at UA, the professionalism, the ability to focus on the business part of his game, not necessarily his talents or his abilities. I am sure that a significant part of his success would have come from his ability to focus on cricket as a career and as a business, and therefore make decisions that would not necessarily get him falling into trouble and not being able to make a West Indies team and being kicked out of cricket and all of those things. So yes, I think that enough is not being done, but it is something that we need to start looking seriously at now in order to maximize the talents of our young people.
All right, Shani, you'll go right ahead with your final one or two.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. What happens to students who attend the schools that do not have a track and field program and wish to be recruited by another school to engage in the sport? And she further asked, will there be an event put in place for this to happen?
An event for this to happen? That's the question? We're not hearing you, Shanil. You're muted.
Yes, that is the question I saw in the chat.
All right. Let me try and answer those parts that I am sure. Well, the question I think that I'd answer is, the question asked was, what happens to a student who is in a school that does not do track and field or provide the resources for the child to do track and field, and how would that child be allowed can that child be recruited by a school that that has the resources to provide for that child? Yes, it's a rule. Our rules don't prevent students from being recruited. So a student can move from any school to another school and participate. I think that maybe the person is hinting at our regulations that minimize the number of student athletes that can be recruited from one school to the next. So we have a quota system that doesn't allow one school to recruit more than a specified number of student athletes for the particular sport. However, that quota does not apply to a student who is moving from one school where he or she either did not play the sport or the school did not have the sport as a part of their curriculum. So it really doesn't. So I could have 15 students from states who doesn't play hockey going to Monroe, and all 15 of them could play hockey. And similar for other sports. Even if the student, for example, does track and field, is at states and has never represented states, it doesn't affect him when he goes to Monroe or wherever, or Hampton.
Thank you so much, sir. Just one more question, the final question. Is it more competitive for female athletes to get scholarships in their areas than male athletes?
Actually, no, I think it's the other way around. I think more scholarships are available for female athletes, and when we talk about track and field, girls football in particular, maybe for some sport where there is more emphasis on male. So, for example, cricket. But I think females get a lot of scholarships, and they are able to get a lot of scholarships once they are able to compete at the level. So I think that is more the issue. Track and field isn't an issue because we have really outstanding track and field. For girls, for football, it's a little bit different because America is a powerhouse in football, and so scholarships are more available to them. And that is where we usually try to get scholarships. Locally, I think there are programs that allow for females athletes, track and field, girls football. And so it's not really much more difficult for girls if they do well.
Thank you so much, sir. Back to you, Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Anil. Well, let me, on behalf of Taylor Hall and all of the participants who joined us, thank you kindly, Mr. Wellington, for taking the time to spend this hour with us. You have indeed created history. This is our first coffee hour session, fully online, and certainly will not be the last. I thank you for sharing with us in your role as president of ISSA. You have indeed enlightened all of us a little bit more on the functions and on some of the challenges that this global pandemic has cast on us, and in particular on our student athletes. And you have given us a glimmer of hope and on how we hopefully will restart, whether sooner or later. So I really want to thank you very much for taking the time to share with us. When our guests are with us in person, we always have a little token of appreciation. And I want to say to you, I have that token for you, and we will meet at some point. As you know, both of us are involved in the cricket, and I will see you at some point and be sure to hand over it. But again, thank you so much, sir, for sharing with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. And I never normally walk alone. So if it's a teacup, not something looking like that. All right, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to share with you, and for those who are watching on your different platforms. Thank you very much for joining, and I hope that I was able to contribute to your understanding of what's happening now.
Thank you so much, sir. All the best.
Hi, Shani. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
All right. Good.
Many thanks to you, Shanil. Many thanks to Shauna Lee for helping to set up and get us going behind the scenes. Really appreciate it. Thank you to all of our persons who have joined us.